created this masterpiece. Yeah, that's exactly what happened, and that's where our story begins. This what you're looking at is Formula 1, the most popular motorsport in the entire human history, and it had to begin somewhere. So if you think that a bunch of dudes just came up with a few cars and started driving circles in the back roads, guess what? You're absolutely right. It happened here in 1906. Well, not exactly here. It happened nearby the city of Le Mans in France, the capital of global motorsport, by the boys of Automobile Club de France. Then, after 5 years of doing whatever, the first Indianapolis 500 was launched in the United States. Then, after about 35 more years, NASCAR was founded, which stands for National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing, but who cares about that, we gotta come back to Europe. So, 1923, the Roaring Twenties are roaring, and the biggest event in history of motorsport is being held at this exact same time. The 24 hours of Le Mans are being held for the first time in history of motorsport. This was the first endurance race ever, but of course it wasn't called like that at that time. The name didn't appear until about half a century later after this was held. Also, it wasn't even real racing at the time either. The teams were just trying out brakes, the suspension, the car's durability, the speed, how much time it takes to break down, what's its limit, and all this technical stuff. It wasn't until 1946 when the FIA was formed, in France of course. And if anybody is brave enough to pronounce it, go ahead, because my best take was Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile. So yeah, so these guys were like, oh my god, this is so cool, we must make it a sport. And they began standardizing the rules, creating classes, and making it whole big thing. That is when Formula 1 was introduced as the king of the sport, and Formula 2 was the build-up to it a year later. Then, in 1950, the first official Formula 1 Grand Prix was hosted, and Formula 3 was adopted by the FIA as the build-up to Formula 2. Then the year of 1953 came, and the FIA adopted the WEC, or the World Endurance Championship. That's where they combined the 24 hours of Le Mans, the Mille Miglia, and the 12 hours of Sebring into one singular big championship. But then, something bad happened. The 1955 Le Mans disaster. A horrific crash launched debris into the crowd, killing a lot of people. It forced the development of closed circuits, rudimentary barriers, and a lot of safety rules. Also, a similar crash occurred 44 years later in 1999 on this exact same track. That was the first day when humanity learned that the cars could fly too. And just so you know, it happened 3 times with this car, on the same day. Yeah, only Mark Webber can do that. But let's come back to our timeline. Now we're in 1960s and 70s, and that's about when the mid-placed engine was proven to be the best in the sport. Yes, the engine can be placed in the middle of the car. That's also when the aerodynamics were introduced, but Ferrari still doesn't know what it is. Anyways, now we're in the big year of 1973, exactly 50 years after 1923. And what happened in 1923? Yes, the first ever official race of 24 hours of Le Mans. And what happened in 1973? That's where we entered the second big phase of world motorsport. The FIA just made the World Rally Championship official, and that's where the things get complicated. And I am not going to go over the entire rulebook and car parts and structures and how they were different and all this stuff. I swear just the timeline itself is enough to confuse anybody who has no idea what I'm talking about. So let's get to the point. For the first 9 years until 1982 there were 6 groups, and yeah, they were called groups 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. Group 1 were the regular, everyday basic cars. They were so basic that they were based on the basic basis, so making them so basic that out of the entire sport they were the most basic cars with basic bases, so you can assume that the races were pretty basic with these basic cars based on basic bases, and it was pretty basic. Then there was the Group 2. They took the same basic Group 1 cars but heavily modified them especially for racing. They upgraded the suspension, tuned the engines, and decreased the required production rate from 5,000 units in a year to 1,000. Then there is the Group 3. They featured regular and modified 2-seater sports cars, and of course it was basically all Porsches. Then comes the Group 4. It was the top tier rally of the pre-1982 era, and they basically took the Group 3 cars, opened the rulebook, and closed it, and they modified it however they wanted. What they wanted to put was in the car, and those cars were flying by like planes. And that's basically it for the pre-1982 era, because the groups 5 and 6 were only endurance based, so they could not go on the dirty track like this one, they had to stay on the concrete. And if you notice the pattern, of course, group 5 was regular cars but for the endurance, and then group 6 was the same thing but for two-seaters. Then the year of 1982 came, finally, and the new regulations were introduced by FIA. Again. Whenever they do this, they always overdo this, so always something goes bad, but more about it later. They took all the 6 groups and decided they didn't like them, so they named them with letters. They merged groups 1 and 2 into group A, groups 3 and 4 into group B, and groups 5 and 6 into group C. And if you remember, the first 2 groups were the lighter ones, the basic ones, and even though FIA changed it from numbers to letters, nothing changed and still nobody cares about those 2. So Group A existed, but it kind of didn't, and you will understand why more later. And so you understand so little people cared about it that a lot of sources, most of them say that Group A didn't appear until 1987, when Group B was destroyed. And speaking of Group B, it was the golden era of rally and motorsport in general. By the way, these are the Group B clips you're looking at. And this is the car from the beginning of the video if you didn't notice. So anyways, all you need to know of Group B is that it was the greatest era of motorsport and that they took the rulebook that the Group 4 closed and smushed it in a toilet. There is nowhere else you can possibly see this again. And look at this guy, he just witnessed a legend of the sport pass by a millimeter off his feet. It's a once in a lifetime experience, and it was free. And the most epic thing was the crowd. Yeah, this is definitely not something that is happening ever again. But after a few accidents, of course, as you could imagine, FIA banned the entire thing and it's not ever coming back. So since 1986 there is a new class that replaced it, the Group A. So that's when the Group A became the face of the WRC. And if you remember what I told you before, the Group A existed at the same time the Group B did, but it wasn't as fun, so nobody was watching it. But now that there is no more Group B, people started watching the Group A as it was the closest thing to it. But the FIA made sure to grave the rulebook onto their foreheads. Oh, and I forgot to mention the acceleration. The Group B cars were accelerating from 0 to 100 km per hour on gravel in 2.5 seconds, which is faster than Formula 1 does now on asphalt. And the top speeds were reaching almost 100 km per hour faster than Formula 1 does now too. That's incredible. What a legend. Now we must come back to the 80s and there is another one last group left, the C group. And it's actually not so rally as you could imagine, it's closer to GT racing if you know what it is. Here is one of the Group C monsters by the way, and you might have actually heard about it. This is the Mazda 787B, the absolute destroyer of the Le Mans, and is the loudest car in the entire world. And yes, you heard it correctly, the Le Mans, the 24 hours of racing. And even though this group is technically a part of Rally, the last stage of Rally, it is actually the part of World Endurance Championship. There's actually a lot more groups than just these, because there's also subgroups like C2, which is just the same as C1 cars, which is the Group C cars, but just smaller and slower, but we don't need to cover that, it's not interesting at all. So now we're in the 90s, and that's about when the GT, the Grand Tour racing was introduced, and the Group GT1 was created by the FIA. This gave birth to a new style of racing, the most popular racing I would say after Formula 1, and it is very close to Formula 1 except for most of these cars, with some exceptions, are road legal. But the coolest thing about GT racing is not the racing itself, it's the cars that are a part of it. They became the legends everybody recognizes, and some of them are Porsche 911, Ferrari 296 GT3, Mercedes AMG and all of the AMGs, Audi R8, LMS GT3 Evo 2nd, but all of the Rs are too, Chevrolet Corvette and all of the Corvettes, Aston Martin Vantage, Ford Mustang and all of the Mustangs, all the Lambos, and you can recognize the by GT near their name. Oh, and my beloved Ferrari F40 as well, yeah. Anyways, now our year has a number 2 in the beginning, and of course we are back with the FIA in their new regulations. Now they started welcoming hybrid powertrains into the game, and electricity. And somehow we lost the 12-cylinder engines in Formula 1 and now we have the V6s. What the hell? Also for this 2026 season, Formula 1 introduced the 50-50 engine, which is 50% gasoline and 50% electricity. Thankfully, they understood their mistake and they're coming back with the V8s in 2031 season. Thank God. In 2014, they came up with Formula 4 as a bridge between Formula 3 and competitive go-karting. And so you understand, those competitive go-karts go faster than your 1998 Civic. Now as we come closer to 2020s, corruption broke the door to the Formula 1. So in 2021, FIA set the initial money limit for the teams to not create monopoly. And guess what the limit is? $145 million per year. Yeah, that's so poor, oh my god. Also, we just reached the end of our timeline. And as we came to 2020s, there is not much else new to talk about, so we will conclude it here. We just actually went over the basics of motorsport and there's a lot more to talk about. For example, different series as Formula 5 and 6 are also present that we are not going to discuss. And the Grand Tour Europe and America and Asia and World Series and the British Series and the cars themselves, there's so much to talk about them. But this is enough information for one singular day, so I am thankful for your attention. Thank you, this was me, goodbye, you will not see me again.